Analog horror is dead. Or is it? Okay, I'm not committing to the Vsauce bit. Analog horror is a genre that I mostly really enjoy. If you're like me, then you grew up in a time that I would consider to be the absolute worst era for the horror genre. The 2010s were plagued by the absolutely horrible trend of shit-ass horror franchises overstaying their welcome and the rise of constant remakes of classic horror stories, now made with the intent of grabbing the attention of younger audiences. Even original horror media that was produced during this period was not exempt from this, with pretty much all of the most popular horror games from this time dick-riding the mascot horror genre. Oh, to think that we could have had PT, which probably would have changed the horror genre as a whole. Ah well. Anyways, in the late 2010s and early 2020s, the internet seemed to rediscover a genre pioneered by the 2009 video No Through Road. This genre, of course, is analog horror, though No Through Road is probably closer to digital horror now, but whatever. Analog horror is a genre defined by the uncanny valley of the VHS filter and scary old music, among other things. It is a genre that has long been praised on the internet for its innovative nature and genuinely frightening visuals, as well as the sheer ability of it to just unsettle the shit out of people, myself included. It is a genre that I, like many people, got introduced to through the series The Mandela Catalog. Quick pause by the way, yes, I know about the Alex Kister stuff, but also I'm aware that he made a response to it. Personally, I'm not sure how I feel about it, but I'm not gonna yap about drama in this video, so do your own research and come to your own conclusions. Anyways, drama aside, one cannot deny the influence that the Mandela Catalog has had on the genre. Though there are definitely more definitive and probably better examples of analog horror that came before it, such as Gemini Home Entertainment and Local 58, the latter of which actually pioneered the term analog horror, the Mandela Catalog was the trendsetter. And as such with any trend, there will be trend followers, for better or for worse. Now before we continue, I just want to give a quick mention to the Walton Files. While it's not really my thing personally, nor is a lot of FNAF related analog horror, which I kind of want to make a video about at some point, one cannot deny the sheer amount of talent going into the Walton Files. There's a reason that it's so popular, so give it a try if you like that sort of stuff, it's just not my thing. Anyways, back to the Mandela Catalog. For the two of you who haven't seen the Mandela Catalog, here's a brief summary. The Mandela Catalog takes place in the fictional Mandela County, Wisconsin. We follow two people mainly, Adam and Detective Thatcher, though we don't really meet them initially. In this story, all religion was taken over by these creatures called the Alternates, which are demons that exist on other spectral planes. Though they've been around since the biblical ages, they've only recently started to manifest themselves through the medium of analog technology. Their leader, Gabriel, is plotting something that we don't really quite know the full extent of yet. However, as mentioned already, during the analog period, these creatures started manifesting in the real world with the seeming intent of forcing people to off themselves and replacing them in the process. It is a great story in my opinion, and it is an absolute must-watch of the genre. Seeing as it was such a unique product of the time, it is only natural that many people took inspiration from this. Following the release of the Mandela Catalog, many people watched it and saw the success of it, and decided to use this as an opportunity to create a horror series of their own. A lot of these have a very noticeable amount of inspiration being taken from the Mandela Catalog's first two volumes. The first two volumes were presented with the very standard emergency alert system / government announcement text-to-speech format that we all know and mostly love today, as well as just being basically fancier versions of slideshows. This piqued the interest of many creators, seemingly because of the ease of use that can be had when creating this content, which allowed many creators to even create their series on their phones. However, in the months following the release of the Mandela Catalog, this led to the advent of what I like to call
"This is my own private domicile and I will not be harassed, bitch!"
series like Basswood County, The Smile Tapes, and hell, even some more modern series like Vita Carnis and Greylock to an extent, all feature a variation of the whole mimic thing that the Mandela Catalog popularized. And this is for good reason. We, as humans, have a built-in glitch called the uncanny valley, which I'm sure you're probably more than aware of by now. It can be a very effective way of writing some solid scares into your series, especially if you have some good artistic talent or, hell, the ability to use Photoshop better than I can, which is not very hard. It's a reason that a lot of jump scares in analog horror look a lot like the Germa Sus face, but that is more just a side effect of people creating scary images through Photoshop. Now, however, with the boom in popularity for doppelgangers in analog horror came the oversaturation of that subgenre, which, in my opinion, can lead to someone who is exploring analog horror as a whole to maybe have a reaction like this when they click on the 500th Doppelganger analog horror series.
That was really bad.
Now, in spite of this, the subgenre mostly continues to this day, which isn't really an issue in my opinion. Can it get boring? Yeah, but so can literally anything that is done a lot. You've just got to sort through the good and the bad, though admittedly there can be a lot of bad. Following this trend though was a trend that I really think could have worked very well in the context of analog horror, but many people tried to overdo it immediately. This trend, of course, is This is a trend that I personally won't talk about too much, as I truly do believe it is oversaturated, and honestly, it's kind of barely analog horror. However, during the pandemic and around the popularization of analog horror, many people took a fixation on the backrooms, which is this pretty much just classic internet horror picture that you've probably seen by now. As for its beginnings within the analog horror genre, most people's introduction was within Kane Pixel's Backrooms series. It is a very well put together series that even has its own movie deal now, and personally, I think you should give it a watch. However, many people watched this series and decided to create their own little liminal spaces and cram them full of monsters, which in my opinion kind of ruins the point of this sort of stuff. Like, yeah, a good monster can work, but when you're scrolling through TikTok and you see the 50 billionth video about another secret layer of the backrooms, it can feel just a tiny bit derivative of the charm that initially made the first backrooms post and, well, video so cool. The initial scare to the backrooms was just the, well, liminality of it. It's a space that doesn't feel real. And whenever you just turn it into a generic like monster horror thing, it just kinda doesn't work for me. Hell, it's a trend that I believe only Kane Pixels continues to do well, with his series The Oldest View essentially being a much better take on a modern unencumbered backroom series. That being said though, I'm sure that there are probably more that I just haven't seen yet, so if you have any, make sure to inform me. Now, in spite of some of the praises that I've given the analog horror genre, it is, unfortunately, time to talk about the clutter of the genre. As with all horror, analog horror is driven by some with the purpose of creating a series that can outperform the series that came before it. Unfortunately though, that can lead to some pitfalls, which I personally call
Let's go gambling! Aw, dang it. Aw, dang it. Aw, dang.
For those of you iPad babies who weren't born in time to experience the peak of the creepypasta genre, hi, what are you doing here?
Stop watching brain rot content. I am inside your walls.
Anyways, the creepypasta trend was a trend in the early to mid 2010s, defined by scary horror stories written by users on a forum with the intent of creating well put together, unsettling stories. Some of the earlier stories of the genre still stand out even to this day as pretty well put together, especially for the time. Go read Ted the Caver, it's pretty good. However, as the genre marched forward, it slowly found itself stuck in the mud, plagued by awful writing, continuous tropes, over-the-top violence without a point just for the sake of being edgy, and a general sense of just trying too hard or trying too little. Those last 2 points are probably arguably the most important part about the genre's downfall, seeing as it felt like every single week there was just some new super scary horror story to be read that was more or less just a shittier copy of the already shitty Jeff the Killer story. This is a trend that, unfortunately, the analog horror genre is no exception to. Mimic analog horror, eldritch analog horror, emergency alert analog horror, serial killer analog horror based on media, analog horror based on media that probably doesn't really need analog horror. These are just a few of the most common tropes and trends that you can expect to see when exploring the genre. I could talk about all of these, but I don't wanna. The two that I would like to focus on are serial killer analog horror and analog horror based on existing media, which leads us to
I really hurt my finger doing that paperclip bit.
Yeah, no, I saw.
Now, if you've at all been familiar with the genre in the last year, or hell, the last month, seeing how many of you joined us from the last video, hi by the way. If you're new here, go subscribe. We just reached 3K, and subscribing statistically makes you reach 120% of your awesomeness. Now, if you've at all been on analog horror in the last year, you've probably heard these two names, those being The Painter and, more recently, the Nickelodeon Hijacking incident. These two series exemplify a lot of what led to the downfall of the creepypasta genre, and what I believe ultimately could lead to the end of analog horror. That being the sheer focus on shock value, commercialism, and exploitation. Now, I'm not going to talk about The Painter too much, as I already have a yapping session about it, but I figured I'd knock it out of the way first. By the way, I got a couple comments on my last video insisting that the creator apologized for some of the stuff that he has said. No, he didn't. He's just kind of more or less the same now. Anyways, in as short of a summary as possible, The Painter is a series about two serial killers who murder people in as brutal of a way as possible. They paint their interpretations of the victims after their deaths. Sometimes they do a little too much trolling, usually involving things of sexual nature, and it's honestly, in my opinion, pretty bad. Now, if you heard me talking negatively about The Painter and your first thought was to run down to the comment sections and yap about why I'm wrong, then honestly, good for you. I'm glad you're able to enjoy something that I personally don't. That being said though, please be constructive. I just ignore comments telling me to off myself or whatever. You're wasting both of our time. Anyways, The Painter long stood as the worst of the analog horror genre for many people, myself included. It almost exemplifies every single thing wrong with the genre in my humble opinion. It is a series made by a guy who is mostly just wanting to sell his paintings, who is using the analog horror tag for publicity, despite very publicly not liking the genre, and ultimately, he's pretty bad at handling criticism. It's truly very unfortunate too, because the guy very obviously has a lot of talent. I should have highlighted it more in my last video, but one of the biggest praises I can give to the series is the fact that the music is all done by the guy. Now, yes, it can give a pretty good amount of whiplash just hearing the pretty good, albeit really loud, background music of the painter, when paired with the actual minimalistic analog horror series, if you want to even call it that. It's kind of barely analog horror, it's more like a slideshow. But that being said, it's still really well done, and a lot of the earlier paintings are pretty well done in my opinion, though I have a lot of issues with his later ones. The painter alone embodies most of the issues that I have with the modern presentation of the analog horror genre. But recently, another series came along, one that somehow managed to frustrate me even further. This series, of course, if you have been keeping up with the genre in the last 2 weeks, is...
No, it was not, dude. I did not find that funny. I have a line with that kind of stuff. I don't find that stuff funny. No.
I actually lied when I called it a series, but it makes it sound cooler, so let's roll with it. The Nickelodeon hijacking incident is a video recreating a supposed hijacking of Nickelodeon in the middle of an episode of SpongeBob. In its 1 minute and 55-second runtime, it manages to include a cheap, shitty glitch jumpscare immediately, a shittier jumpscare following it that somehow manages to make fucking SpongeBob a victim of the shitty scary face effect, and yet another goddamn jumpscare, before ending the video by, for whatever reason, disrespecting the death of the creator of SpongeBob, Steven Hillenburg, who was continuing to work on the series for as long as possible despite publicly struggling with, and ultimately succumbing to, Lou Gehrig's disease during the last year of his life. Yeah, it's no wonder that the original video got taken down. The shit that this video got was absolutely for good reason in my opinion. The Painter, while being a series that I still don't really like, at least had the decency to not include real people in its plot. The Nickelodeon hijacking incident, however, is pretty much just sheer exploitive slop that not only has little care for the genre, but also has no care for respecting an actual beloved person who lost his life far too early. That being said though, don't harass the guy who made it. I'm sure that he's already gotten plenty enough of that. Now, many people point to series like these, as well as ones that feature similar aspects, and come to the conclusion that the genre is on its way out. And if you were to look only at these two, then yes, that would be a very reasonable conclusion to come to. However, I personally believe that we are in the early stages of what could be the next phase of analog horror. I believe we are seeing a true...
If I chop you up in a meat grinder, and the only thing that comes out that's left of you is your eyeball...
Lately, we have been getting some absolute bangers in the analog horror genre, so I'm gonna mention a few and give some examples of things that I like about them, and why I believe you should check them out. First and foremost, we have the aforementioned Greylock tapes. This is a series that I wasn't sure that I was gonna like initially, but as soon as I got to the second episode of the series, I was sold on it. Now, I must mention beforehand that yes, it is another government conspiracy analog horror, which you might think is done to death. However, Greylock is a truly very unique take on the genre, featuring some absolutely stellar voice acting and visuals, as well as just having a straight up great story. On top of that, it has some genuinely great scares, even featuring my personal greatest fear, home invasions, so yippee. Another one that I've liked recently is Vita Carnis. Though its take on eldritch horror is a bit much for my personal taste, and it falls into some tropes of the genre, such as the text-to-speech voice and some found footage elements, its visuals and practical effects are very appealing to me, and sort of outweigh the negatives that I would see in it. Paintings of the creatures give off very strong Trevor Henderson vibes, and the practical puppets, particularly those of the mimics, yes, I know, doppelgangers, whatever, are extremely solid. The Man in the Suit is one that I'm particularly fond of personally. I know that a lot of people give it flack for being kind of dumb and a pretty generic revenge plot, and admittedly, it kind of is. But after a certain point, you just have to utilize your suspension of disbelief to step back, look at a series, and think, hey, that's a guy turning into Godzilla and he vomits blood and turns other people into Godzilla creatures. That's pretty cool. The cool aspect of it personally overrides some of the sillier aspects of it for me. And even still, considering the silly aspects, it's a lot of fun. Digital horror is also a very good continuing point for those interested in the genre. I won't go too much into it in this video, as Sagan Hawks has an excellent video detailing some digital horror series, but personally, if I had to pick one, I'd pick Morley Grove. It's a modern take on a Slender Man story that utilizes the technology present in it in a very cool way, showing how this creature is wiping the kids it kidnaps off the face of the earth. It's genuinely great stuff, and it's still ongoing. These are a few examples that stand as proof that the analog horror genre may not be entirely cooked in my opinion, as well as many other examples that I'm sure are out there too. However, the most popular ones lately, and the ones with the best potential in my opinion, are the...
Don't talk like that. Don't do that brain rot stuff with me.
A lot of popular analog horror videos have come in the form of either extremely short and concise series, or one-off stories contained in one video. The prime example of this, and the most popular bit of analog horror recently that everybody and their granddad has been talking about, comes from Dr. Nowhere. They've experienced a lot of success in the genre in the past, featuring videos that have absolutely fucking freaky monster design, but most recently they've been blowing up for the Boiled One phenomena, which is my personal favorite work of theirs. This 10-minute video features some freaky ass visuals, elements of a government cover-up, incorporating the the real-life Great Blackout of 2003 very cleverly into its story. And my favorite aspect of it, its ties to World War II and religious horror. Religious horror is a very understated genre in my opinion, despite the sheer quantity of content relating to devils and demons or possessions or what have you. It is a genre that fucks with me a little bit personally, because I was raised religious, though not really anymore. So it kind of resonates with me in that way, touching on an aspect of horror that I think is pretty cool. Plus, as a current history major in college, it's cool to see some underrepresented trivia surrounding World War II in it, though that's really besides the point. On top of all that, again, it is only one video and it's 10 minutes long, so there's no need to worry about commitment if you want to dip into the genre a little to see if it's for you. Although Dr. Nowhere has hinted that there may be more, so I don't know. Even still, even if it does continue, I would not only recommend watching it, but keeping up with its development. Another very good one-off story in the analog horror genre is The Kid in the Camera, which I won't spoil a bit of for the sake of allowing you to view it at its fullest potential, but it is a pretty frightening story with some creepy implications and very unique stylization for an analog horror series. Though they are very short and sweet, these videos show that the analog horror genre may not be cooked, and that a potential way forward for the genre as a whole could be through the medium of more short-form entertainment, though I absolutely hate short-form media and like TikTok and stuff.
Okay, so the first night is never usually that bad in any of the games, so I'll play through.
Although yes, analog horror is currently in a very fragile state, it is a state with room to either shatter and burn out with a sigh, or continue to grow and improve on the medium that has presented itself. Ultimately, it is now up to the creators who want to express their stories to truly push the bounds of innovation for this genre in order to ensure its continued success. Whether that'll happen or not, I guess we'll have to see. Though I truly do hope it's the latter rather than the former. Anyways, that concludes my yapping for now. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to like or subscribe, and join our Discord in the link in the description below. Of course, if you have any thoughts or criticisms, make sure to leave them in the comments. I try my best to read them all. And of course, thank you for your support from the last video. From the last video, we surpassed 3,000 subscribers, and I can't express enough just how cool that is to me. If I could show 8-year-old me that I was doing this well on YouTube today, I think he would just die on the spot, explode, boom, gone. Anyways, thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Bye bye!